Welcome to this discussion. I think the adaptation of technology is an imperative for any farmer, any sustainable farmer, but it is a difficult decision. It's a decision of technology is changing, technology is expensive, and the point is, at what point do you choose what kind of technology? So I'm going to start by, Davi introduced my two panel members, but I'm going to start with Michael. Michael, first of all, welcome, and welcome, Jacques.
Thanks. Thank you.
Michael, if you were to give me some context, some background to your farming operation and your personal history, just to give us a bit of color.
Thank you, Theo. Yes. In the 80s and the early 90s, we didn't have computers, we didn't have internet, so we never even knew what was going on in the rest of the country, let alone in the rest of the world. So being on the machines myself for most of my farming career, you'd harvest a field and you'd know there was so many 10-ton trailers going out, and that was your yield calibration. But harvesting, you would realize there were weak spots and there were high-yielding spots. You could pick it up, and we never knew why.
And you couldn't measure it in detail.
That is correct. You never knew where they were. You knew that it was somewhere in the middle of the field. There was a high-yielding spot, and then there was a low-yielding spot. And we never understood why. We couldn't work it out. We didn't have the agronomists that we have today. And that was a question that always had to be answered. Why was one field doing better than the next one? Why was in one field there were low spots and high spots? So there were always questions. And luckily, in the late 90s, we started with technology.
And at that point, you were, it was unique, wasn't it?
Very. I was lucky to be one of the chosen few. I think three yield monitors came into the country. The then Northmec through Case IH brought 3 monitors, and we were lucky they brought them to Middelburg, and I was asked to put one onto my harvester, and wow, what a change. You suddenly realize that there are major differences in the field, and some parts excellent, and some parts you didn't want to tell anyone that it was so low. So yes, big differences. It was wonderful to see. And then, but what do you do with that information? You've got to build up a history. And then where do you go from there? So it's a long story. Technology doesn't work immediately. It's something that takes time. Technology has got a lot to do with precision farming, which we try and do to the best of our ability. Climate is difficult in South Africa, but with the technology, we're able to do a more effective farming, a kind of a good farming practice, precision type farming.
And if you look back, was that a major turning point in the farming operations?
Yeah, it was a big difference, because then I could get an agronomist after 3 seasons of harvesting and build up a history of the field. And then we could go back to what we called grid sampling and smart sampling. And then we could get soil analysis. And with the right agronomist, he could work out what was needed in the soil, when, and at what stages different fertilizer chemicals had to be added to certain areas. So that's when the differential applications came in. So yes, Theo, it's a long story, and it's a story that's been close to my heart, and I love talking about the technology that we've used. And there's so much more that has happened in the last couple of years, from the late 90s to now. Technology has exploded in the agricultural sector.
And I must say, I sometimes think that people from the outside listen to or hear the word technology, but they don't really understand the impact it has on the ground. The real impact it has when you apply it and the actual impact in the end in terms of yield, productivity, those kind of things?
Yeah, yes, we use GPS technology. We using satellite GPS down to 25 millimeter accuracy.
25 millimeter.
25 millimeter accuracy in agriculture. So we do differential fertilization, differential lime applications, differential population, seed populations on our planters. In the old days, you used to see a planter and it had markers, so you knew where to come down the next line. We got autopilots on the tractors, auto steer, that you push a button and the tractor goes where it's supposed to go according to the GPS.
Exactly.
So all in the 25 millimeter accuracy. So it's really developed into something phenomenal. And it's in certain areas like your autopilot, it's expensive to start with, but then you get to save money on diesel and the effectivity of a tractor. You're not overlapping, you're not leaving areas. So your costs on your tractor are extremely effective. It can't be bettered when you're using auto steer. And then your differential applications, whether it's seed or fertilizer, you're putting down where it's necessary.
In exactly the right volume.
At exactly the right volumes. So you're starting to even out that field where the low spots and the high spots, you want to get everything to the high spots. It's not cheap. It takes time. But you using that technology to build up that whole field to as close as what you can to the high yielding spots.
Jacques, if we now talk about a bit of history, and clearly it is almost paramount important that you embrace technology if you want to create the yields and get what the maximum that the soil or the piece of land can offer you. But when you choose technology, obviously that is a massively difficult decision. What do you take into consideration when choosing technology, specifically in terms of what Michael has said?
Yeah, it feels like you're asking all the difficult questions to me, but
it's only one.
I think the first one, and Michael can maybe just add into that as well. So technology is not limited to mechanization. No. There's seed technology, there's chemical technology, etc. So I think all of that has to be in balance. So yes. I just want to put that out there as well. I think the first question would be is why do you want to do this? I think for me it's around the profitability of the farming operation. I oversimplify this now, but I think we all are very familiar with the cost-income squeeze. We know that maize is basically getting cheaper in real terms. So the only way for you to outperform your neighbor is to be a lower cost producer of that commodity. So that for me would be the one driver why you want to do it. And secondly is that social license of your footprint that we leave on the environment. So can you farm more sustainably by using your technology and lowering the footprint that we have on that? So I think firstly understand why, and then the next question would be is then how. And it's quite interesting that you mentioned that you started with a monitor.
Yes.
And I think that's our message today as well, to say start with your yield monitor, to be able to understand what
Make sure you can measure.
That you can measure, that you actually at least have a sense in terms of what does your yields look like today. And as you sit in the combine, if there's a variation in yields, get out and go and look at your land, your fields. And I think that's the easiest way to get to know your fields as well.
I think, Theo, if I can add to what Jacques has just said, it's very important that you use the technology through your agronomist as well, soil sampling. And your agronomist has got to be a special kind of person. He's got to have the knowledge of what goes on in soil. And he's got to understand you.
As a person, as a
person. And he's got to understand your soil. If you get that right, you've got to know where you want to go to. If you want to just have a mediocre yield, this is not going to be the system for you. If you want to get to a high yield and you're prepared to spend the money on it, and you have an agronomist who understands that, we have doubled the yield since the 2003, 2004. We have doubled our yields, and it's not only due to the technology in seed and fertilization, and there's a lot to do with the technology that we have at hand with machines, and we don't look at a normal soil sample as a NP and K anymore. There's a whole list that we look at now, your micro and your macro elements, and that goes with it. So it's a long term of building up and using that technology.
And once you get that integrated, that's when you get the benefit. Jacques, the decision to use technology. Michael has noted that it's there's an investment required. How do you balance that?
Yeah, and I think we also need to look at that investment in context. So I think the first question is to say, what is the level of technology that you're having in your farming operation today? And various producers will be at various levels of technology adoption. If you've got very little technology in your operation today, I would almost suggest to the producer that your yields are maybe also very far from being optimal. So that payback period, it might be a huge investment on day one.
But it's in the yield.
But the payback period might be in the shorter term. So I think you talked about auto-steer or variable fertilizer. I think with an air cart, what we've seen in the past is that within a season or 1.5 seasons, you can almost have a full payback of that investment that you've made. But it is a costly exercise on day one. The question will be, is there a positive leverage in doing that? And then for me, it's a business decision. So do I want to invest in this, yes or no? And I think it's a long-term benefit.
Very.
And then the role of the agronomist also important in terms of assisting with the application and the possible benefits.
Definitely, yes.
We've had a family, father and son agronomist for the last 20 years. And so they really know our farming setup, and we've been able to use the technology in conjunction with them, and we built up the yield slowly, and it's not a quick fix. Using technology, it's lovely to use, and you can see what's going on, but it's not a quick fix. You're spending the money now, but you do build up, and after a couple of years, you do reap the rewards using
small
technology.
increments. It's
very small,
and learning as you go.
Yes. When there's not everyone that knew the technology that was available, so trying to understand it was also a problem in the early 2000s, and so.
How do you, Michael? There's a assumption or a misconception that it's difficult to adapt technology if you're slightly older. Do you buy that or not?
Theo, I think if my son was here today and he, like me, loves machines and the farming side of life, and I think he would tell you that I'm one of them that push him to do use the technology. I am all for the technology. It's there. We would not be reaping the yields that we are today if we didn't have the technology on the machines that we're using. Where we used to add the computers as a retrofit to the machines. They come out standard. What a pleasure. Everything's there. And everything is isobus these days, so it's just a connection. And so it's a lot easier just to get into it.
Just plug it in.
When in the old days it was difficult to do. And it's been worth it. And yes, I'm all for technology, and that whatever's coming next is, I think everyone's heard about driverless tractors and all that kind of thing, and these amazing big machines that you sit and work remotely, and that's all in the pipeline. They're big companies, not only Case, I think, but they're big companies out there throughout the world that is working on this totally new concept of farming. And I'm not quite sure how that's going to work, and I'm not sure if I'm going to be around to see that happening. We did have a driverless tractor in our area last year. It was something very difficult to handle, but yes, that's going to be part of the future.
Jacques, the technology is continuously evolving. It's changing. It's like for the rest of us, cell phones. Every 2 or 3 years, there's a new one. And if you look back at the cell phone of 10 years ago, it's an old piece of equipment. Yeah. If you make the decision to invest in technology, the fact that you know that within 2 or 3 years there will be something better, I want to ask that question on 2 fronts. First of all, from a farmer point of view, how do you approach it? But then also from a product development and supply and manufacturing company, how do you approach that?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, Theo. So firstly, technology evolves quickly, as you mentioned. I think there's a lot being developed at the moment that's not even available in the free or the open agricultural market today.
I'm going to come to that a bit later. Just
yes.
What can we look forward to? But let's first start with the question.
But I think my point is that your hardware might not change. It's your software that changes frequently.
Okay.
And that you can update. And you can actually update that remotely as well. So it's not to say that every time there's a new version or an update or new technology being available that you need to necessarily change your hardware.
So you need to split between hardware and software.
Yes. Yes. So I think similar to a mobile phone, you can update your software on the go. So I think that flexibility is there. So,
and that forms part of making the decision earlier.
Yes, I think so.
If you touch on it in the beginning, if you were to look at the crystal ball 5, 8, 10 years in the future, where is the trends and what are the big leaders in technology working on?
Yeah. I think that the whole trend, and whether it's in the ag industry, I think in the motor vehicle industry, exactly the same. We basically in an era of automation, of moving to autonomy. And I think that's the direction that agriculture is going as well. I think where we're going from a grain producer point of view is that you want to start measuring and managing at a per plant level, no longer at a per hectare level.
So you're moving from and you were talking about, 2.5 centimeters?
Yes, that is correct.
Accuracy.
That's what we're using.
So how do you manage each of your plants optimally? I think that's
and not the hectare.
Yes.
And the other point is then, so you've got one piece of technology. How does that integrate with the rest of your equipment, number one, and who assists you with putting this all together?
Yeah, I think if I can start off, and Michael, you might have a different, hopefully a similar view, hopefully. So I think it's that ecosystem of business partners around you. So I think it's important to have a single platform that would allow you to integrate with all your equipment, with your input suppliers, with your bank. Somebody that understands the agricultural sector has to have access to that platform where your data is available, but in the form of management information.
I think the big word at the moment is telematics.
Yeah.
So we've got our different application tractors. So we've got tractors that are spreading fertilizer, and they sending real-time data to the cloud. We've got tractors spreading lime on variable rate, and they sending real-time data to the cloud. And we've got the tractors that are doing the preparation work, and they're sending that data, whether it's the diesel or whether it's the work they're doing, whether it's the temperature of the tractor, how long the tractor has been working, what percentage engine power you're using. That's all being sent immediately to the cloud. The harvest information is being sent to the cloud. And you can go and take that, and it's available to anyone who has a password to your cloud information. So you can draw it, you can send it directly, you can give it the password to your agronomist. So he gets real-time information coming to him, and he can decide immediately what is the next step. Or he can maybe see that there's too much lime application going down, or not enough fertilizer. So there are quick adjustments that can be made immediately. We're running on a 1.5 hectare scale at the moment. Every 1.5 hectare it gets its own application. And I think Jacques is the next, the future is per plant. Where is that plant? What is that plant living on? And how is that plant going to grow to be its maximum? So I think that's the future.
Can I maybe just add one more thing there too? So I think we often hear the term Internet of Things. And I think for me that's real in agriculture today. Because your farm is just an operation of connected machines and all linked.
If we then talk about sharing the data in terms of your different information, is there some of that data that will be valuable for you that you can act on, and how would that process work?
Definitely. Obviously, data is a sensitive topic, as we all know. I think our message is very clear to the producer as well, to say it's your data.
The producer owns the data,
yes,
but you can utilize it whenever it's provided benefit.
Provided they give us access to that. For us, it's around the anonymized data at the back end. So we would like to be in a position where we can go to a producer and share anonymized data of all the peer groups and say, where do you rank in that?
And look at trends, or look at
trends and see where there's opportunities to improve on the operation.
I think one of the biggest things that have come through in technology is the mechanical side, that your dealerships or your branches on their workshops can immediately see if there's an error problem that's happening with the tractor.
Can they pick it up on their side?
They pick it up immediately.
And they pick it up almost, before you pick it up. Before the driver might pick it up, they might pick it up.
That is correct. So before you even get an error code, there's a warning that comes up on the computer at the workshops. So,
and now with that process, so they get a warning, the oil is running too low or too high or too hot or whatever, and then what happens?
They phone and stop you immediately. It's your choice if you want to stop or not, obviously.
But they'll phone you and say, look, you believe you should stop.
There's a problem. Can we send a mechanic out to come and look at it? And when you're talking about tractors, anything between 3 and 10 million rand per machine, that's without the implement. Theo, I think
you want that call.
We want that call. I mean, a call, a mechanic coming out for 500 rand an hour, 700 rand an hour, whatever, is a lot cheaper than redoing a 5 million rand engine.
I can understand that.
Yes.
And that's also part of technology. That's part of communication. That's something that wasn't there 20 years ago.
No, it wasn't there a couple of years ago. Things have really exploded.
So that means your business, Jacques, needs to be set up for that as well. And how do you set up that part of the business?
Yeah, I think that's important. I think when you sell a tractor like that, that's connected, that you have remote access to and early diagnostics through machine learning. Obviously, we need to equip our technicians with the necessary software and tools to be able to firstly get the alert and secondly be able to diagnose remotely. So that's part of what we equip our technicians and dealers with to be able to offer that service. Yeah. And I think it's all around the uptime. I think what we see, the trend is we get larger machines, fewer machines at a farm. So
that machine needs to be running.
And you've got a small window when it comes to planting season and harvesting season. So downtime costs money.
It does. And so technology isn't just planting a seed in the ground. That it's a broad base. There's a whole basket full. And so to do everything is not easy, but it's a build-up of technology.
I'm going to ask Jacques your question, then I'm going to go to the advice side for people that are viewing or listening to this. But Jacques, the decision to choose between various technologies. I mean, if you just walk around here, there's technology all around, and there's different forms of technology, from seed, precision farming, equipment added to equipment. There's a massive amount of brands, names out there. How do you make informed decisions? Because surely it can't be on the best and biggest marketing budget. There must be something else that you use.
So we would prefer for you just to come to the case stand, and then it's a short conversation. No, I think, again, I think the farmer would need to sit down, the producer need to sit down and say, okay, where is that opportunity for me? So I would say, do your planning first. Decide what you want to do.
Thorough planning, detailed planning, yes. What's your requirements?
And see where is the upside. If you can only do one thing, what is the biggest upside or base lever that you have that you can pull? And I think it's not an either or sometimes. It might need to be a mix of everything. I would argue it doesn't help you to have the latest technology on the mechanization side, but you don't need to use the latest seed technology.
That's
or at
correct.
least a very recent seed technology. So I think it has to be in balance. In
And
order
you,
to get the return.
and you start with your homework and defining what you want and what you can get from it.
Yes. And I think the opportunity for us as input suppliers into agriculture is there to collaborate a little bit more. I think there's opportunity for a seed company to work closely with a mechanization company, for them to understand how does variable planting work in practice.
And actually how it works.
Yes,
The guy on the floor, out on the ground, on the tractor, what does he do?
exactly. And similarly on your sprayers, how does aim command actually
Yes.
work, and how can I reduce my chemical by doing that?
Theo, if I can come into that, I agree totally with what Jacques says. And there are 2 points that are really important. When you sit down and you want to go the way of technology, you've got to have a company close to you that has that technology and the backup, the support of that technology.
So it's not, it's the support in the technology.
The support, I mean, we've all heard about your computer in the office or at home crashing.
Yeah,
These can also crash.
yeah.
So technology is the same as what happens in your office.
And what happens when it crashes? That's the
That's
question.
it. And do you have to stop your whole planting operation? Jacques has just said your window is so narrow these days with our climate. So you need that support. It doesn't help us sitting in Middelburg and we get